lovely people! Welcome to the channel. I'm the self-proclaimed Blue Dragon. This is an art channel targeting an adult audience. I primarily speak about my free not safe for work webcomic Dark Horse, which is a magical girl post-apocalyptic fantasy story. Links down in the description for anyone interested in that. This week I'm talking about Mahou Transformation, and for those of you who aren't aware, Mahou is just the Japanese word for magic or sorcery. And this project that I've been working on is congruent to Dark Horse. It's actually part of a submission to a magical girl zine that I'm going to be submitting later in the month. On October 25th is when the due date is for our project submissions. Alrighty, a Beat is going to be having a Kickstarter, and as that starts to develop, I will be giving y'all more information. But right now, let's just kind of focus on the work in progress. I wanted to talk about what I was doing in this video. I had taken some time to sketch out my main characters, Kana and Rina. In this video, I am actually showing you the ink job of Rina that I perform so that I could get it ready for the zine. Later on, I'm going to move into my version of Photoshop CS5, and then I'm going to be kind of messing around trying to add some effects to make this feel super magical girl transformery. Those of you who are new to the channel, welcome. Those of you who are returning, you may have noticed last week that I've started dropping in the song titles for the background music, and I started doing that just kind of a little bit of shopkeep. I started doing that because I'm someone who really enjoys checking out the music that people have in their videos. I often will comment on people's videos about the music that they use. So I figured I would make it easier for anyone who likes the royalty-free music that I use to find it, and to kind of give them credit, particularly in the case of Unicorn Heads, that band. I use their music all the time in my videos, so I wanted to try to give some credit to these people, as well as reminding myself that I need to find them and figure out how to give them a little bit of money just because I use their music so much. So several times on my channel I've discussed how in my younger days I was very heavily influenced by magical girl manga and anime. Of course, it all started with Sailor Moon, which is kind of what I got the inspiration from for this very short sequence. I wouldn't even call it a sequence. I didn't really script in because I had a full story going. I had 7 pages to tell the story in, and I'm still working on brevity, so I did my best, and I reserved 2 panels for Kana and Rina. Actually, 3 panels. This is part of the actual transformation, which is supposed to resemble the transformations that we would have seen in Sailor Moon, or any other kind of magical girl transformation that kind of came after that. So I'm doing my best first to outline. I tend to always ink my images. If you've been around the channel for a while, I start my projects with pen and paper. I work traditionally. Then I use a Sanji nib and a dip pen essentially, and Sumi ink. Actually, I use a vegan Sumi ink. I think it's vegan. It's got synthetic glue in place of animal glue, so they don't scent it, which is kind of a downside. I used to love the smell of the Sumi ink because the animal glue smells so horrendous. They have to put sandalwood or patchouli or something in there. I think it's sandalwood. But at any rate, I digress. But once I finish inking Rina, who is one of the 2 main characters of Dark Horse, you can kind of see Kana. I've already sketched her out in the background. Once I get that inking done, I'm going to move into Photoshop CS5, which I refuse to update my computers and stuff so that I can keep using that, because I don't really believe in I don't believe in the subscription format for software. My partner's a programmer. I understand that people do need jobs, but the subscription-based thing is just, I know that's kind of where things are going to lead to. But for me, it just seems like it's kind of ripping off the customer. So I work off of old laptops. Anyway, I wouldn't want to buy a new laptop anyway. Those are expensive. But yeah, that's why later on in the video, I move on to CS5. And I'm really trying to cohesively and shorthand capture that transformation sequence. So I don't really show Kana's transformation, and you're not going to see completely finished pages or anything, because contractually for this zine submission, since we are running a Kickstarter, I'm not allowed to show y'all the finished pieces, but I am going to show you what I ended up doing with this. This is actually going to be kind of a 2-part video. It starts with me working on Rina specifically, but in next week's video, I followed a tutorial from TikTok that had actually been circulating around on Twitter, and I'm going to talk about that next week, but this is kind of a two-part video because I've been working on components separately, trying my best to make sure that I am working to the best of my abilities, since this is going to be a paid gig. Not that I don't work to the best of my ability anyway on my projects, but you know how it is. You want to be like, you want to have pride in your work, and you want to kind of showcase your best work that you can when you're submitting to a zine. So that's kind of why I'm sketching things and inking things separately and then putting them together in Photoshop, because sometimes, like with me at least, I don't know about other people, because I work on regular 8.5 by 11 paper, and I tried to keep most of my pages down to 6 panels on a page. I can't really, like, I try, you can see it if you look at my comic, Dark Horse, I do try to draw characters small at times, but I just am not good enough to keep things proportional, and I kind of mess up on the faces sometimes. So for this specific project, I took the time to sketch things out separately at a comfortable size for me, ink, and then put together in the digital document, if that makes sense. I'll probably be working on a page later on before this Kickstarter begins, or maybe during the Kickstarter, and I'll show you a little bit of what I'm talking about whenever we get to that point. Speaking specifically about Rina, her element is water. She has the water element, whereas Kana, her element is light. So in this video, you can see that Rina's hair is kind of watery. I did my best to give her like some splashes, and when I start coloring her, I really want to like be careful with my color palettes. Most of this comic is going to be psychedelic colored, because while it's 90s themed, first off, Lisa Frank was extremely popular both in the early 90s and on through to the middle of the 90s. But also, towards the mid-90s, late 90s, like 60s nostalgia started to really come back into vogue. We had bands like Fish, you know, we had a lot of jam bands like Mo, things of that nature were starting to get really popular, and so the psychedelic colors, black light posters, things like that, that was kind of the culture that I was a part of, because I got really into the Beatles in like the late 90s when I was in, like 1999 was right about when, like in fall is when I started high school. So it was when I was in middle school that I got really influenced by the 1960s. I had a lot of pen pals when I was younger. I had like 32 pen pals from around the US and a couple from abroad. Because that's kind of, you know, we didn't really have internet access. It wasn't like in everybody's house at that time. And even when I finally got internet access, oh my god, it was AOL. So like, and we lived out in the country, so it was not the best. You'd get kicked off quite often, and then you'd have to sit there for like sometimes literally 10 minutes trying to get on the internet. So ways that I entertained myself, because I lived out in the country, besides playing with like my cousins and my sister, I also had like a lot of pen pals. Like my cousins and I, we all had a bunch of pen pals. So I'm setting up that story because I bought a lot of stamps, and post office was holding an anniversary like vote for like whatever their new 60 stamps were going to be, and I got really involved in that. I'm going to talk in more detail about that in another video whenever I start talking about like my page color choices. But I will say that like the bright 60s colors combined with like what was popular in the 80s and 90s anyway, with like neon colors, those were all very influential, and so I wanted to really put that into this comic. That isn't to say that pastels weren't popular also, especially when we're talking about shoujo manga. You know, something like Magic Knight Ray Earth, they're primarily using brighter, heavier saturated colors with their manga covers. But Sailor Moon had that very soft, airbrushed feel to a lot of the covers, and there was a lot of bright colors, but very pastel leaning, or already pastel in use. Same thing for Fushigi Yugi, that was very pastel as well. But for this, I really, because my comic is, well, it's obviously inspired by Japanese manga, it's set in the US at this point, this part of the story. So I want it to be kind of a blending, a melding of both Asian influences and Western influences. So I opted to go for like the bright colors. And you can see that in this video, while I'm working on Rena, this specific panel is going to be not quite as heavily saturated. I'll show the finished image at the end of the video, but I do still want to kind of capture that brightness a bit. And we're going to see that more in the actual page coloring video that I work on later on in the month. I think I'm going to get to that video in November, actually. I've been trying to like plan out my topics. One thing that I really had fun playing around with was trying to decide the color of line work for Rena. I wanted to kind of capture that magical girl transformation feel by changing the line work color. I don't do that a lot in my comic, but I did when I worked on Kana's transformation, specifically because her element is light. Normally, I just keep my outlines black, but for that transformation for Kana, I decided, hey, why don't I try that also with Rena for this specific zine? And I think it turned out well. At first I was kind of playing around with gradients, but the lines were just really not visible. So I settled on having just a solid color, but not a regular color, you know, not black. I decided to use, I think, purple. And I think that complements the blue very well. I've been very conscious about my color choices for this because I tend to just kind of go all over the place. So I've been trying to limit my palette aside from the palette that's like multicolored. I know that's not going to make any sense at all, but I'm going to talk about like color theory and some videos that I was watching in addition to like the inspiration again in that video when I talk about the actual page colors. So not in this video. I wanted to just touch upon how I've been careful with my colors. I wanted to capture that kind of Sailor Moon and other Mahou Transformation vibe with how they take all the details out of the characters and they just have like this really cool, trippy, like whatever pattern, design, whatever's going on, and then they just have the outlines.
But we know you can do it.
Oh yeah, we've trained enough. Moon Prism Power.
I really wanted to capture that. I feel like that is very indicative of the genre, and I thought that it would be fun to try that and kind of trial run it here in the zine, and I might actually use that in future panels in the actual Dark Horse comic once they start accessing their powers in a more heavily used way. They're gonna have like the transformation sequences a little bit more evident in the comic itself, if that makes sense. And that's all I've got to say about this, because next week I'm going to be talking about the water background that I give this panel. Tune in next week if you want to see how the background turns out. Again, I'm going to be talking about the tutorial that I use to create this really awesome water background. I'm really excited to share that, and I will also share the link of the person who created the tutorial. Even though I'm not on TikTok, I will share that TikTok link so that person gets credit. Yeah, I've still got so much to talk about with this project. I've really been having so much fun on it. I know I need to get back to like the Dark Horse topics, and I also want to kind of squeeze in a Whimper in the Dark video because it is October and I'm going to be working on the conclusion of last year's story arc. Oh my god, I just never have any time, y'all. But until then, if you would like to support the channel or support my art or comic, links are down in the description for Patreon and Subscribestar. I have like a lot of content on those channels. Otherwise, I will see y'all next week. Peace and love. Fare you well. And of course, keep on trucking.